Session is focused on unlocking multi-level restoration implementation. This is session 3 in our Restoration Day. Thank you all for joining us, for being here with us. We are going live on YouTube, and that's why we're waiting for the right moment to start. So I'm Bárbara Bonfim. I work at WWF Brazil, and there I lead the nature-based solutions and carbon finance and markets agenda, working closely with our restoration team. So Taru and I have been leading this Restoration Day with specific sessions to focus on many of the multi-dimensions involved in restoration. So first and foremost, I would like to invite Mariana Oliveira. She's going to be our moderator today. She's the Forestry Director at WRI Brazil and has been working with restoration for the past 10 years. So Mariana is going to be leading this session and inviting the panelists. Thank you.
Can I have my... Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Or good morning. I don't know if you already had lunch, but in Brazil, we only say good afternoon after we eat. I hope you are enjoying COP30 so far. Many news around the negotiations today. I'm not sure if you are following precisely, but I hope that we have good advances today and tomorrow so we can see things evolving. That also includes the restoration agenda, that it's part of our discussions. And as you know, many of the NDCs and the commitments that countries have to mitigate or even adapt for climate change includes nature-based solutions. And by including in nature-based solutions, ecological restoration, forest landscape restoration, it's included. And that's why we are here today, because we want to discuss how the commitments that were made a few years ago, it could be for the NDC, it could be for the bond challenge, it can be a compliance with like the regulations among each country can evolve, and how do we ensure that we are tracking it, that we are monitoring the impacts of this pledge, of this restoration that it's happening. So that's the reason why we organized this event, and also recognizing the different levels of governance that restoration has. It can be either a country, it can be a water basin, it can be a state level, or even a property, right? A landowner can lead upon this and also have its own ways to monitor and track the restoration. So to start our panel, I will invite Thiago Bellotti. Thiago is the forest director of the Brazilian Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, and he has been leading the national policy on restoration, the Planaveg, and he will bring his briefly remarks to help us to bring some ideas and how this has been progressing here in Brazil over these past 10 years. Thank you. And
how many time I have? How long I have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yes.
Good afternoon. Can you hear?
For those that will need translation, please put the things on.
It's a great pleasure to be here. I've been a panda for 6 years. I left WWF on February to go to the ministry, so it's a great pleasure to be with my friends, with Talu, with Bárbara, and also with Mariana. If you mind, I'm going to speak in Portuguese, my native language, but I speak slowly. You can understand the translator. You do a great job and great work. Okay? So jump to Portuguese. Bom, quanto diretor de florestas, eu sou responsável pela agenda de restauração no Ministério do Meio Ambiente. E é uma agenda que está olhando aquela meta, a famosa meta de 12 milhões de hectares aqui no Brasil. Uma meta construída, né, uma meta, na verdade, um compromisso que vem lá do Acordo de Paris. E esse compromisso ele está sendo implementado a partir de um plano, que a gente chama de Plano Nacional de Recuperação da Vegetação Nativa, que foi uma construção extremamente coletiva. O Brasil, os seus planejamentos, ele, e ainda mais nessa última gestão, tem trazido a participação social, a participação da sociedade civil, o setor privado, né, e outras instâncias do poder público de uma forma muito coerente, muito forte. Então, o meu papel lá é fazer com que um plano nacional ele aterrize nas paisagens, que ele aterrize nos territórios, mas com coerência. Coerência porque existem políticas correlatas, políticas similares muitas vezes no âmbito subnacional, até no âmbito nacional. Então, o que a gente faz é uma concertação de iniciativas para poder chegar nessa escala de 12 milhões. E aí, Mariana, o que eu posso falar, onde estamos no plano nacional, já dou um spoiler para vocês. Eu vou dar um spoiler aqui, eu acho que é importante dar um spoiler. A gente está com um trabalho muito grande de entender, já que o plano nacional ele foi criado lá em 2017, a Lei de Proteção da Vegetação Nativa, que é a lei, o famoso Código Florestal, ele de 2012, que fala que já obriga cada landowner, né, cada proprietário rural, dono proprietário de terra, a ter sua área restaurada. A gente precisava saber qual é o número de restauração, o que a gente pode contabilizar dentro da meta de 2 milhões de hectares. A gente vai divulgar, a gente vai aprovar. Não vou falar não, vocês vão ter que ir lá. Mas a gente está praticamente aí com uns 30% da meta. 30% aí o pessoal faz a conta, mas eu não vou falar o número certinho. Então, uma das primeiras coisas que a gente tem feito a gente precisa dar transparência aos planos nacionais. Então, a primeira coisa que a gente está fazendo, então, é esse sistema de monitoramento e reporte para falar o quanto a gente tem, porque sabendo o quanto a gente tem, olhando para 2030, a gente vai entender o que a gente precisa mirar, né? O que a gente precisa priorizar para chegar lá. Acho que outra coisa que a gente tem feito também no Planaveg, né, pelo Planaveg, é uma atualização de priorizações, né, de mapeamentos, né, de modelagens para ajudar os tomadores de decisão, já que o plano foi construído de uma forma conjunta, as ações que o próprio mapeamento é feito com a sociedade civil, com o setor privado, para apoiar a sociedade civil, o setor privado, governos subnacionais a investir seus recursos, a criar essas políticas públicas direcionadas para áreas que as suas iniciativas geram mais valor, seja em biodiversidade, em clima, em resiliência hídrica, em geração de emprego e renda. Tem várias camadas que a gente trabalha. Isso na perspectiva de planejamento, né, espacial, monitoramento, transparência. Um outro trabalho muito forte que a gente faz no Brasil hoje, também buscando coerência, dentro desse ecossistema de recursos e fundos que a gente tem para uso do solo, para uso da terra, para transição, para agricultura regenerativa, para restauração, como que esses recursos se conversam e chegam nas paisagens, como que eles chegam no território. Uma das coisas que a gente faz, então, enquanto diretoria de florestas dar coerência para todos esses novos fundos que estão chegando e que podem impactar. Então, a gente lançou, o Ministério do Meio Ambiente, o Ministério da Fazenda lançou, na semana passada, o 4º leilão do Ecoinvest, que são recursos do Tesouro, voltados para restauração e bioeconomia na Amazônia e nos demais biomas brasileiros. Então, o nosso papel é orientar que os investimentos em restauração sejam para restauração produtiva, né, para garantir soberania alimentar, para garantir bioeconomia e também silvicultura de nativas, por exemplo. Ecoinvest, o leilão número 2, que foi no início do ano. A gente também orientou para que as ações de restauração tivessem conectadas, fossem coerentes com esse planejamento espacial que a gente está fazendo de área prioritária para a Amazônia. E a gente orientou também que as ações tivessem uma linha para restauração em larga escala, pensando em mercado de carbono, sistemas agroflorestais, restauração produtiva e também silvicultura de nativas. Isso só falando de Ecoinvest. Então a gente conseguiu alavancar para a reabilitação de área degradada, e muito desses recursos vai ser para restauração, 30 bilhões de reais. A gente conseguiu. Então, assim, é um plano nacional que tem uma articulação multissetorial e a gente vai influenciando, né, as captações para que cheguem onde a gente gostaria. Além disso, a gente continua com o multilateralismo e as parcerias com organizações internacionais. O GEF, né, o GIF, o GCF, que a gente está discutindo um grande projeto agora com conservação internacional, creio que eu acho que o WRI também está envolvido. A gente tem a própria estratégia, o Plano Nacional de Bioeconomia, com uma missão específica... Está acabando? Tá. Uma missão específica para... Né, o Plano de Bioeconomia são várias missões, né, da bioeconomia, uma de florestas e restauração. Então a gente conseguiu levar para o olhar de bioeconomia uma missão específica de restauração para fortalecer e olhar a cadeia da restauração como, né, uma cadeia da bioeconomia. Enfim, então em finanças a gente tem feito essas pontes e a gente tem direcionado essas pontes, esses recursos, a partir do exercício que a gente está fazendo nesse momento, que é de definição de territórios prioritários no Brasil, para a gente fazer a política nacional descer. Então, mas a gente faz isso não sozinho, a gente faz isso dentro de uma comissão nacional, que é um espaço de governança estruturado e robusto, que a sociedade civil faz parte, o setor privado faz parte, né, a academia, a ciência faz parte, e esses territórios estão sendo definidos. A gente já fez um primeiro exercício de territórios, são mais ou menos uns 20 territórios, e tem muito mais território da restauração no Brasil. Mas a ideia com esse primeiro exercício é como entender qual é o grau de maturidade desses territórios para a atração de investimento. Então, com esse exercício de maturidade do território, a gente consegue entender quais as condições habilitantes que a gente precisa trabalhar, quais são os gargalos que a gente precisa destravar para que recursos como Ecoinvest, como eu falei, GCF, os projetos GEF e os demais recursos entrem no território. Mário, é mais ou menos isso que a gente está fazendo nesse momento com a ajuda do WWF, WRI e todos os outros parceiros.
Muito. Hi, I'm here. Thank you, Thiago. I think
Thanks a lot.
It's important for us as like organizations that work in the restoration agenda here in Brazil and globally to see that you are evolving not only on implementing the public policy, creating the right instruments, the financial instruments, mobilizing the civil society, but also tracking in terms of hectares and what's the economic impact for the people. So thank you for your contribution. I know that you have to rush to another one. So thank you for joining us, and I will go to the next part, which is the panel.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Mariana.
Continue our conversation here, and we have some very interested people from other parts of the world, not only from the host country of COP30. I will invite Amy Duchel from, she is the Senior Forest Office from FAO, and works within the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Thank you, Amy, for joining us. Also, I want to invite Ruben Manokara, Global Lead of the Carbon Finance and Markets Task Force. Thank you. And I will invite also Juliana dos Reis, Coordinator of Climate Change at the Espírito Santo State Secretariat of Environment and Water Resources. And finally, Niels Peter Noring, Director of Climate of the Danish Agriculture Association. Thank you, everyone, for joining this conversation around restoration. And the idea here is to have like a very enlightening conversation to hear what people are doing, what the different organizations are being able to progress towards restoration agenda. And I will start with you, Emmy. I know that you also have a presentation, but the question that I have in my mind for you, looking after this multilateral perspective, how the restoration can contribute with the different agendas that we have, the climate one, the biodiversity one, the Rio Conventions, the desertification as well, and how the multilateral governance can help also to bring transparency to this agenda to make sure that we are tracking and also accelerating action. Thank you.
I thank you. Nice to see everyone, and thank you for having FAO here. I actually wonder if it's probably easier not to show slides given the format. I think that's probably better. I can just speak to what we're doing within the context of the UN decade. So as, I mean, most of you know, we're in the middle of the United Nations decade on ecosystem restoration, which is 2021 to 2030. And, you know, this was adopted by the UN General Assembly to respond to the critical need to prevent, halt, and reverse the degradation of ecosystems worldwide. And FAO and UNEP together were invited to lead the implementation of the decade in collaboration with the secretariats of the 3 Rio Conventions and other relevant multilateral environmental agreements. So even in the first part of your question, just that is a way to bring the different, you know, streams of work together in a more coherent approach across the UN system in the context of the decade. And, you know, I think one of the key contributions that the UN decade has made, I mean, there's been a few, but one of them has been creating a shared vision and common lexicon for what is ecosystem restoration. And that's by really acknowledging all types of restorative activities across a range of ecosystems and for multiple benefits. And that was achieved by publishing the principles and standards of practice for ecosystem restoration. They were developed by the UN Decade Task Force on Best Practices, and it was a review of 125 guidance publications of all types, and a global consultation, including from people in 57 countries, and a year-long consultation with indigenous peoples. And so it was really bringing kind of the best that the community had to offer over many years and trying to consolidate that into these best practices. And they're called standards of practice. And if you look, you know, UN Decade, Ecosystem Restoration Standard of Practice, you can find those online. And now there will be another, you know, the tools are being developed around those standards of practice that you can even be part of the testing phase on that. And you can find all of that information on the UN Decade website. There's also the FIRM, which is another task force. So there's the UN Decade Task Force on Best Practices, and then there's a UN Decade Task Force on Monitoring. And that's been led by FAO, and that's basically this framework for ecosystem restoration monitoring called FIRM, F-E-R-M, and it's the official monitoring platform for tracking restoration progress in the context of the UN decade. And now, under Target 2 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, FAO is the custodian for CBD Target 2 of restoring 30% of degraded ecosystems, and FIRM is being used as a way to measure the progress of that target. So, of course, and we're working across the 3 Rio Conventions, I mean, especially with the CBD in the context of Target 2 and that monitoring, but also we've been requested by the UNCCD to facilitate data exchange and build joint capacity, including on the restoration of degraded agricultural lands, which is very important. And then under the UNFCCC, I mean, all of you probably have been following the Global Goal on Adaptation, and of course the ecosystem target there and the indicators that someday will be agreed upon and negotiated. There's a clear way to also measure and monitor restoration progress as an adaptation solution there. So I think that's sort of a big, you know, example. We have done a lot of work with Brazil, including with the Plan of Edge program. We you know, looking at methodologies and helping track progress towards Brazil's 20 million hectare pledge that Thiago so nicely outlined. And of course, we also have these world restoration flagships. And the Trinational Atlantic Forest Pact was recognized as one of the world restoration flagships, and that's in Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. But those are really nice because those basically give a lot of attention to these very important, you know, landscape level, sometimes multi-country, sometimes smaller, but really kind of best examples in the world, and we try to help promote those through the UN decade. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And quite interesting to see and reflect that we are in the middle of the UN decade. And now more than ever, we have the responsibility to make sure that we accelerate implementation, because we need to show that it's possible to accelerate, and these efforts that we are taking towards FAO and the partners are really making sure that this will succeed, right? So thank you for sharing. And also, in terms of driving implementation, now I want to invite Ruben to talk a little bit about, from a perspective from Asia Pacific region, that you also have some coalitions, such as the Result Coalition, that is driving implementation towards different countries. And this is really interesting to see because you have different regulations, different types of like governance. So I would love to hear from you how these platforms can scale up restoration and support countries in moving from pledges to practical delivery. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariana. And if you allow me, I would sort of like to share in 4 different parts, right? So first, sharing the theory of change that we have in WWF when it comes to restoration and what is the underlying philosophy as an organization, how the Panda approaches restoration, and then to flow towards 3 examples of how globally, but also in Asia Pacific, WWF has been working with partners to implement that restoration activities, right? So going to the fundamental philosophy that WWF has on restoration is to break the boundaries of project level restoration. And that's really to work at the landscape level. And through that, you can bring bigger benefits to economy, to society, but also to ecology, right? So ideally, you have this landscape, and within the landscape, you have a patchwork. Within that fabric, you have the patchwork of different activities. Some might be focused on sustainable commodities. Some might be focused on agroforestry, for example. Some might be focused on mobilizing carbon finance. But through that, you're better able to balance ecology, economy, and of course, societal benefits. So that's the fundamental belief. And then we go to the implementation part, Mariana, as you say. And WWF is working globally. And maybe to share an example of how that has translated into implementation actions, and I'm very happy that it was shared on the UN Decade of Restoration, because that is the North Star, and that's what guides the implementation, and that's what the implementation efforts use as a reference to work towards. And one example, before I go into the Asia Pacific example of it, is what WWF is doing in Africa, which is under the forest landscape restoration. And in Africa, WWF is working with 9 different countries to restore 13 million hectares of land by 2027, using that and contributing that to the goal. And similar to that, and learning from the experience of that, WWF is now working with institutions, including ASEAN, to implement that in Southeast Asia, to see if that can be replicated in critical landscapes, like in Southeast Asia, in the Mekong region, but also in important landscapes like Borneo, which are tropical forests that are very important for ecology, communities, but also biodiversity. So that's one very concrete example of how WWF is working to replicate the successes in Africa, in Southeast Asia as well. And the second, as you mentioned, Mariana, is the Result Asia Pacific initiative. And that is a great example, and that's led by FAO, and we're very fortunate to have the guidance and leadership on FAO on this. And the function of Result is to coordinate, but beyond coordinate, it provides a framework for restoration. So it has 20 countries within Result Asia Pacific, but it also brings together 40 members. And to coordinate across 6 different targets, and there are 27 action items along that, right? So that is very important, because this coordination mechanism becomes a mechanism where not only these 20 countries can come together, but the different entities, including WWF, can coordinate restoration activities within the platform of Result, right? And that is great, but that needs to be complemented with finance. And that goes to my third initiative that I want to share on, which is much talked about in the lead up to and also at COP30, which is the TFFF. the Tropical Forest Forever facility. And that's an example of bringing finance to complement what we have in coordination mechanisms. And through that, we've seen the leadership from Asia Pacific and from Southeast Asian countries as well. So Indonesia, for example, has taken the leadership to work as the coordinator for Southeast Asia for the TFFF. Similar, neighboring country to Indonesia, Malaysia, was one of the co-designers of the Tropical Forest Facility as well. So we see these three examples of coordination platforms that bring together coordination, but also mobilization of finance. And these are concrete examples of how platforms are useful and are very helpful to mobilize real action towards implementation. Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you. And it's interesting because when you see the similarities of the different regions or the different landscapes are similar as well, because the challenges that people have to implement the public policies that are in place are the same, the challenges and also the opportunities, right? So it's important for us to thrive and continue to share among each other these experiences, because it helps us as practitioners, as public policymakers to advance. And here I have news from Denmark with a quite interesting example on how public policies can link different sectors such as agriculture, climate, and biodiversity agendas. So Niels, please, could you please share with us the experience that you have for the last, I think, years? And also, what are the insights that you have that could be applied to this audience and globally as well for us to accelerate action towards restoration?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting. It's very interesting to be here. I think it's vital to have a good dialogue between the green NGOs, between bodies in the UN, and between the agriculture and food sector. We have been around the table in Denmark with the green NGOs and the government, and we have made an agreement where agriculture is going to transfer 15% of the arable land to nature and forest. And we have also been around the same table discussing on a CO2 tax on agriculture, and we'll be the first in the world to have a CO2 tax on agriculture. How come the agriculture sector agreed on such things? I think, first of all, we must admit that we are facing challenges. And let's just give 5 figures. 1.5, 40, 800, 30, and 0. Some of you may know it. Some may not. The 1.5 you can find in the Paris Agreement. That's the maximum increase in temperature. 40% is to underline that there will be an increase in demand for food by 40% from today and until 2050. And we're coming from a situation where 800 million people are going to bed every night hungry. 30% of the world's emissions are coming from agriculture. And the 0, we cannot take any more land into cultivation. It's the opposite. We have to take care of the nature, and we have to transfer some of the land, agricultural land, to nature in the future. So we have to produce more with less. These challenges, together with the pressure on agriculture in Denmark, meant that we had to go to the table. And we decided it's better to be at the table than on the menu. So we have to look at the pressures. We are going to transfer 15% of the land. 7% is going to be transferred to nature very, very fast. And the rest, it will take 20 years. It's about new forest. So these are the two elements. Should I continue? I could continue, yeah. How will we do it? One of the things is that it's voluntary. The other thing is that it's going to be compensated. The government will finance it. And the third thing is that it's going to be decided locally which areas are going to be transferred. When I'm saying that it's going to be voluntary, we have some peatlands, lands where there's a large emission of CO2. We have to bring them back to nature and we wet them. So the agriculture is now able to go in to voluntary schemes. But if the agriculture won't go into the voluntary schemes, we will meet the sticks. So we start with the carrots, and then we will have the sticks. And the sticks, we will have a very, very high CO2 tax on emissions from these peatlands. So in a couple of years, these lands will be transferred into new nature. About the forest, it's going to take 20 years from now on to transfer so much land into forest. And it's going to be voluntary. It's going to be compensated. And as I mentioned, it's not going to be decided in the office in the capital. It's going to be decided out in the local areas where we're going to transfer. We have set up 23 local green tripartites, and these green tripartites are going to decide which areas should be transferred into nature and forest. So this is everything about. We have some challenges. We have to move. We have to move fast. And it's better to do it together with others than standing outside and shouting and not getting a good compromise. We would never, in the agricultural sector, have written this agreement as it stands. The government would never have written it, and the green NGOs would never have written it. But it's the best compromise, and we will continue farming in Denmark while we will have more nature, better environment, and less pressure on the climate. Thank you.
This is amazing because that's it. Nobody does anything by itself, right? Mostly on the restoration agenda, this is a proof of concept that it's quite important. Thanks for sharing your example, Niels, and very inspiring to lead to the next person that I want to ask a question, Juliana. Juliana is a leader in her state, which is a state here in Brazil in the Atlantic forest, which is the other rainforest that we have in Brazil in the coast of the country. And she is like a person that is dealing day by day with different initiatives that includes also supporting the implementation of the governance, promoting the community participation and coordinating some mechanisms. So my question for you, Juliana, how can these experiences that you have can guide scale across Brazil and beyond? And what are the most recent advances that you have to share with us about Espírito Santo State? Thank you.
Olá.
For those that do not understand in Portuguese, you can put your phone, okay?
Olá, boa tarde a todos. É um prazer estar aqui, agradecer o convite da WWF. Eu sou Juliana Reis, sou coordenadora de mudanças climáticas no Estado do Espírito Santo. Também sou secretária executiva do Programa Capixaba de Mudanças Climáticas e coordeno ainda a elaboração dos planos, tanto de descarbonização quanto de adaptação. E eu gostaria aqui de destacar que o sucesso, acho, das nossas políticas públicas lá na pauta de adaptação, na pauta de mitigação, na pauta de restauração, é ter uma arquitetura de governança muito clara, robusta, participativa, integrativa. Então, por isso que a gente construiu, com essa base, uma estratégia, que é a Estratégia Climática do Estado do Espírito Santo. onde a gente busca integrar a agenda de adaptação e a agenda de descarbonização. Lá, o nosso principal instrumento de descarbonização, de mitigação, é o nosso plano de descarbonização, lançado em 2024. No eixo de adaptação, nós temos nosso plano de adaptação, que foi lançado, inclusive, aqui na COP para consulta pública, e a gente entende que a agenda de restauração é parte fundamental para a gente alcançar as metas, tanto de descarbonização quanto de adaptação. Porque quando a gente fala de restauração, não é uma agenda só de descarbonização, ou só de mitigação, ou só de adaptação. É das duas agendas e elas têm que ser trabalhadas de forma integrada. E lá a gente tem um sistema de governança muito robusto, onde a gente tem um marco legal institucional bem estabelecido por meio de lei, decretos, políticas. A gente, inclusive, está trabalhando na atualização da política de mudanças climáticas, onde a gente vai incluir mais questões de restauração dentro dela. A gente tem um decreto que a gente está lançando para a governança do Plano AVEG, a gente está fazendo a atualização desse plano lá no Estado, com previsão de ser entregue no início do ano que vem, tudo isso em parceria com a WWF. A gente tem espaços formais de participação, então a gente tem fóruns, comitês, que são bem participativos, onde traz a sociedade civil, traz o setor produtivo, a academia, o setor público. E a gente tem uma integração de políticas, que eu acho que isso é fundamental. Integrar as políticas, os planos, para que eles se conversem, e isso a gente faz muito bem feito lá. A gente fez nosso plano de descarbonização e na estratégia de Afolu a gente teve uma conversa com o plano de agricultura de baixo carbono. Assim, a gente teve também uma conversa com o plano de recursos hídricos. O plano AVEG agora está sendo também trabalhado, respeitando o que também está alinhado ao que está no plano de descarbonização e também vai estar alinhado com o que está no plano de adaptação. Então, é muito importante essa integração. Vale ressaltar algumas iniciativas que a gente tem lá também. A gente tem o programa Reflorestar, que é um dos maiores programas de pagamento de serviços ambientais do país, onde tem resultados incríveis já. E agora a gente está com um programa novo que a gente está estruturando junto com a WWF, com a TNC e a WRI, que é o Programa Capixaba de Carbono para a Restauração. É um programa inovador, uma ação estratégica, é o primeiro projeto público-privado em escala do Brasil, então tende a trazer muitos benefícios, né? Então o programa incorpora uma série de elementos inovadores, financiamento climático para a agricultura familiar, então acesso seguro ao mercado de carbono para propriedades entre 1 a 20 hectares. A gente também tem aí um potencial de sequestro de carbono gigantesco, cerca de 4 toneladas de carbono por hectare ano, que pode chegar aí, em 40 anos, mais de 6 milhões de toneladas de carbono equivalente. Então, tem um potencial gigantesco para contribuir também nas nossas metas de descarbonização do Estado. Então, tem uma escala projetada muito grande, que é restaurar pelo menos 15 mil hectares até 2030, com cerca de 2 hectares por propriedade participante. Tem uma permanência aplicada, então essas atividades de restauração elas passam de 5 para 40 anos, isso é muito importante. Tem um impacto social também muito robusto, porque vão ter mais de 5 mil produtores beneficiados em 5 anos, então isso é muito importante também para contribuir até na pauta de justiça climática, que está no nosso plano de adaptação. Temos mais de 13 mil, vão ter mais de 13 mil produtores em 20 anos beneficiados. E uma inclusão de gênero, que isso é muito importante também, que a gente vai ter 50% dos beneficiários vão ser mulheres, com pagamento de 30% a mais. Isso é incrível, isso é muito importante também. E fortalecer, claro, a biodiversidade, com mais de 9 milhões de árvores plantadas e mais de 60 espécies nativas atualizadas. Então, isso tem um potencial muito grande, tanto para contribuir na agenda de mitigação, quanto na agenda de adaptação. E a gente, lá no Espírito Santo, entende que isso só é possível porque a gente conseguiu organizar toda essa estratégia no programa Capixaba de Mudança Climática, com uma governança muito bem estabelecida, né, por meio da participação de todos os setores, inclusive o envolvimento de todas as secretarias. Isso não é só uma pauta do meio ambiente, isso é uma pauta da saúde, da agricultura e de todas as outras secretarias. Então, envolver elas neste processo fortaleceu muito essa questão. E para o que a gente tem lançado aqui na COP, falar um pouquinho dos nossos avanços, a gente lançou aqui na COP a plataforma do Programa Capixaba de Mudanças Climáticas, onde dentro dessa plataforma a gente tem todas as informações que eu falei aqui e várias outras, porque o programa ele conta com mais de 70 ações, e ele tem mais de 3 bilhões investidos já, então são muitas ações importantes, tanto na pauta de mitigação quanto de adaptação. A gente lançou para consulta pública o nosso plano de adaptação aqui e a gente criou também um outro programa que é o selo Descarboniza ES, para a gente incentivar as empresas a se descarbonizarem. Então, as empresas que apresentarem um inventário de emissões, uma estratégia de descarbonização e comprovarem 5% de redução ou compensação, elas vão ganhar um selo que vão ter uma série de benefícios. E o primeiro selo foi emitido aqui na COP também, então é uma grande entrega para o Estado. Então, acho que para ter esse resultado, para ter resultados reais no território, acho que é preciso ter uma governança forte, organizada, participativa e integrativa. Eu acho que é isso. Obrigada.
Obrigada. Thank you. If from one side I have the agriculture sector, we have also the decarbonizing the industry as a possibility to integrate in the restoration agenda. That's why this is a very interesting agenda for me personally, and it's always good to learn from your experiences to advance and really learn in our overall picture. And now I have a challenge for all of you here. It's a 1 minute response answer that you have to give to me for a special question. In your opinion, it's the same questions for all of you, okay? What's the most essential enabler to accelerate multi-level restoration, ensuring that the commitments translate into real action? Amy, so what's the most essential enabler to accelerate multi-level restoration, ensuring that commitments translate into implementation? Okay. Niels, can you start for me?
Yes, I think it's dialogue and cooperation. Dialogue and cooperation between NGOs, agriculture, and governments. And dialogue between countries sharing good practices. We have to learn what they are doing in other countries. And we must act. And act in a way where there's no losers. Nature, environment, and climate must approve, while there must be a business case for farmers.
Dialogue, first one here. Ruben, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Marina. And I was afraid I'll go last, and then all the good things would have been said already. So I'm very thankful you asked me to go next. And I think to build on the point that was made, a critical enabler to unlock multi-level restoration is creating the business case for multi-level restoration. Because only then can you grow the pie of how much finance is flowing into multilateral level restoration. But the positive thing is that we are already seeing that happening, where you have a patchwork of different financing elements being incorporated in landscapes. The example I shared in the AFR 100 in Africa is a good example where you've seen finance mobilize at scale. And why that's essential is because then it's not just about reallocating a pie, but then it's about growing the pie. And when you create the business case, you can grow the pie and you can flow additional finance into this restoration. And the TFFF is a good example of growing the pie beyond what's traditionally seen, where you have, traditional climate finance, you have carbon finance, and you have these new mechanisms that create a business case and grow the pie, and then enable multi-level restoration.
So we have dialogue and we have the business case here. Juliana, would you like to go next?
Sim. Bom, eu acho que é muito importante criar uma governança compartilhada e integrada, e incluir a restauração como eixo central na estratégia de mitigação e de adaptação, né? Uma estratégia central climática. Então, trazendo a restauração, trazendo essa importância para a restauração dentro da transição para uma economia de baixo carbono, para alcançar as metas climáticas, para alcançar o que está posto nas ações de adaptação, de se tornar mais resiliente, ter mais segurança hídrica, eu acho que é importantíssimo. Então, dessa forma, eu acredito que seja fortalecida a pauta de restauração, trazendo ela como estratégia central para a ação climática.
Perfeito. Então, go ahead. So
Now I'm ready.
Go.
So I think it was good for me to listen to these responses because I was thinking of it in the context of the UN decade and kind of what it has been. And, you know, what's been nice about the UN decade is it's been more of almost a movement than an initiative. And one of even the founders of the UN decade, you know, used to call it generation restoration. And this is something that, this idea of drawing on everything that's good out there at any scale and amplifying it. I think that's been probably one of the main, achievements of the UN decade, along with sort of the other practical tools, but just this culture around restoration to promote collaboration of very different actors in the space. And so I think that's something that can add, something to the list.
Yeah, last but not least, right? Amazing. She stole my answer. Yeah, it was amazing. I think you just compliment actually. So I think we have here a good composition on enablers that are needed for us to scale up restoration. But at the same time, we have different sectors, we have different countries showcasing that it's possible to do it. It's here. The technology is available, and of course, we can look after the science to help us on even improving what we are doing. And that's why I want to ask here Tarwin and Paula that will come up here in the stage to talk a lot about the Science Task Force that is being led by WWF, so they can share a little bit on this. Thank you, everyone.